When you see all these people screaming and crying and all that...
Screaming and crying? Why did I spend all that money?
He said it one last time. I was never fired from Kiss. After 50 years, Ace Frehley breaks silence on betrayal, brotherhood, and the lie that chased him. Paul Stanley once showed up at his doorstep begging him to stay. So who really quit? And why did Gene Simmons twist that story until the very end? A quiet morning becomes a turning point. A knock at the door, a lunch meeting full of tension and choices. In March 1982, Ace Frehley stepped away from Kiss. But how that exit unfolds clashes with the story the band tells. Ace recalls the moment plainly. They didn't want me to leave. The first time I quit, Paul Stanley showed up on my doorstep, took me out to lunch, and was trying to change my mind. He says he arrives at the table knowing his decision is made. Paul pours coffee and tries words, but Ace leans back and stays silent. Why does Ace believe he leaves of his own will? Because he felt boxed in. After original drummer Peter Criss left in 1980, Ace says he lost all my power in the band, thanks to Simmons and Paul overruling him. On the studio floor, in the boardroom, he feels the band shape shifting away from his creative center. He orders a lunch meeting, but exits on his own terms. The band later tells a different version. In 2019, Simmons claims Ace was fired 3 times for unprofessional behavior. Ace's response is cold. I was never fired from Kiss. I quit twice, 1982 and 2002. His voice carries hurt. He watches public memory replay the version he rejects. By walking away, Ace positions himself as the architect of his life, rather than the victim of band politics. He leaves to reclaim creativity. He walks from stadiums and smoke machines, but into solo albums, independence, and a legacy on his own terms. The lunch table remains a silent witness to the first act of self-liberation. But what happens in his second departure, 20 years later, shatters the myth further. A world tour ends. A legend walks away. Secrets stack behind the final goodbye. In 2002, after the 1996 reunion of Kiss, Ace Frehley left the band again. But this time he's facing bigger stakes and deeper wounds. Ace's version goes like this. They still say in interviews that they fired me, but I was never fired from Kiss. I hate when I hear that. And they say that both times I was fired. I quit both times, in 1982 and 2002. After rejoining in 1996, Ace toured the world with his original bandmates. But by the early 2000s, he felt sidelined. He tells an interviewer, I knew eventually I was going to leave. I lost millions of dollars. But what I gained was sanity. So why did he leave this time? Because he sees himself shrinking inside the machine. With Kiss's revenue soaring, albums, merchandising, stadium shows, Ace realizes he fights creative complacency. He says Peter Criss's departure in 1980 triggered a shift that left him without power. The reunion drew attention. In 1996, all 4 originals played, together for the first time in years. However, when things quiet down, Ace senses the move from band to brand. When Ace walked away in 2002, the music world surges. Kiss had sold over 100 million records worldwide by then. His departure cost the band an estimated $7.5 million, according to his own account. That figure marks how high the stakes really were. But Ace trades dollars for independence. His solo career ramps up with 10,000 Volts, 2024, and the acclaim of his 1978 solo breakthrough. This second exit becomes more than a departure. It becomes a statement. I run my story. He exists on his terms, not theirs. And yet the official narrative carries a different name. The public record shifts. A powerful myth eclipses the real narrative. Ace Frehley claims 2 voluntary departures. Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons have a different version. In a March 2025 interview with Guitarist magazine, Ace bluntly stated, They still say in interviews that they fired me, but I was never fired from Kiss. I hate when I hear that. And they say that both times I was fired. I quit both times, in 1982 and 2002. That remark opens a loop of memory and legacy. Why did the band claim firing when Ace says he left on his own terms? Earlier in 2019, Gene Simmons told Guitar World, "Ace and Peter, Chris have gotten 3 chances, fired 3 times, for drugs, alcohol, bad behavior, being unprofessional." Ace retorts sharply on social media, "I was never fired from Kiss. I quit twice, because you and Paul are control freaks, untrustworthy, and were too difficult to work with." That clash stands as a public feud, thick with emotion and contradiction. Why does this matter so much? Because the version the public believes shapes Ace's legacy, his agency, and his dignity. He argues that by quitting, he preserved his creativity. By being labeled fired, he lost ownership of his own story. In 1978, his solo album Ace Frehley became the best-selling of the 4 solo releases by members of the band that year. That success validates his claim to independence. Ace also recounts a breakfast meeting attempt. "They didn't want me to leave. The first time I quit, Paul showed up on my doorstep, took me out to lunch, and was trying to change my mind." That image of Paul at his door conflicts with the firing narrative and adds weight to Ace's version. The myth of his termination carries monetary and emotional weight. If he was fired, maybe he lost rights, revenues, respect. If he quits, he retains control, pride, and freedom. Ace chooses the latter. A guitar, a hit song, a New York anthem, all come together. Ace Frehley breaks free. Through his solo success, he finally answers a part of the story. "I'm not a quitter because I lacked power. I'm an artist who claimed it." In September 1978, Ace released his self-titled solo album on Casablanca Records. The album reached number 26 in the US Billboard 200 and earned platinum status by October 2, 1978. The single New York Groove climbs to number 13 on the Billboard Hot 100, the highest peak of any of the 4 original Kiss solo efforts. Ace later admits he regrets not writing New York Groove himself, yet he credits it with proving his creative independence. Why does this moment matter so much in the context of his story with Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons? Because through it, Ace shows he has artistic weight apart from Kiss. He started his own voice. He outsold the other 3 members who released solo albums at the same time. That success gave him leverage, the ability to quit by choice, not by force. During the recording process, Ace works in Plaza Sound Studios in New York City and at the Mansion in Sharon, Connecticut. The production credits list Eddie Kramer and Ace himself, showing his role goes beyond guitar hero. He steers the vision. And while his bandmates dominate the Kiss machinery, Ace builds a personal foundation. The result, the myth of the fired musician falters. Here stands a man who walked away because he had the track record to walk with. His exit no longer reads like defeat, but like emancipation. A single record overturns rumors. An album hits platinum and sets a new bar, yet the tension keeps rising. In September 1978, Ace Frehley dropped his self-titled solo album and showed the world a new version of himself. Released on September 18, 1978, through Casablanca Records, Ace Frehley plays alongside the solo albums of his Kiss bandmates, Stanley, Simmons, Chris. His album peaked at number 26 on the Billboard 200 and earned platinum certification by October 2, 1978, confirming shipments of over 1 million copies. The single New York Groove rockets to number 13 on the Billboard Hot 100, the only hit of the quartet that lands in the top 20. Ace later reflects, "The success of my solo album made me realize I was more creative away from Paul, Gene, and Peter." Why does this chapter mark a shift? Because through hitting platinum, he proves the narrative of quitting holds merit. He walks away not in defeat, but in creative victory. He trades stadium spotlight for artistic control, and the numbers back his move. Session drums by Anton Fig, production credits shared with Eddie Kramer, and recordings split between the Mansion in Sharon, Connecticut, and Plaza Sound Studios in New York. He includes what he calls studio ideas I wrote in secret, songs like Snowblind, Ozone, I'm in Need of Love, taking literal power into his own hands. The cover New York Groove may not bear his writing credit, but accepts his interpretation and gives him a mainstream anthem. However, success breeds internal cracks. While he's basking in platinum glow, his old bandmates see competition. The brand of Kiss snarls at the individual spark. Jealousy simmers, past exits resurface. A platinum album changes the game. A hit single plants the flag of independence. In September 1978, Ace Frehley dropped his solo album Ace Frehley, and through numbers and sound, proves the path he chooses. Released on September 18, 1978 under Casablanca Records, the album reached number 26 on the US Billboard 200 and earned platinum status by October 2nd after shipping over 1 million copies. The single New York Groove rockets to number 13 on the Billboard Hot 100, making it the highest charting track from the 4 solo albums Kiss released that month. Ace later admits, "The success of my solo album made me realize I was more creative away from Paul, Gene, and Peter Criss than I was around them." That phrase turns into a quiet manifesto. He records at Plaza Sound Studios in New York and at the Mansion in Sharon, Connecticut. He plays guitar, bass, and sings. He produces with Eddie Kramer. He takes control. Why does this matter in his relationship with Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons? Because through this album, Ace proves he holds value without their puppet strings. He walks away with momentum. He shows creative power anchored in solo identity. His exit from Kiss changes from retreat to statement. Still, success brings internal pressure. While he lifts off solo, Kiss watches. The brand, the board meetings, the legacy, they tighten. He senses a shift. Rise becomes risk. The numbers validate him, yet the tension builds behind the curtain. Ace wins the freedom he said he sought. But that freedom also marks a fork in the story with his former bandmates. Arguments fling headlines. Regrets sit in quiet diaries. The spotlight burns brighter. In the years following his platinum solo record, Ace Frehley entered a phase of conflict with Paul Stanley, Gene Simmons, and with himself. In the March 2025 guitarist interview, he states plainly, "They still say in interviews that they fired me, but I was never fired from Kiss. I hate it when I hear that. I quit both times in 1982 and 2002. That quote opens a floodgate of contradictions, media citations, and legacy rewrites. Paul and Gene continue to reference firing, while Ace repeats he chose to leave. Publicly, Gene Simmons labels Ace's behavior as unprofessional, claims of drugs, missed cues, and backstage chaos. Behind closed doors, Ace admits he felt sidelined after Peter Criss's departure in 1980. He says then, "He lost all my power in the band." The combination breeds resentment, not just of bandmates, but of a legacy he feels misrepresented. The emotional toll hits deep. His reputation, his identity as a creator, the memory fans hold. Ace fights to be seen as creator, not casualty. His solo success underpins that fight, yet grudge and guilt swirl together. He once said to the press, "Yes, I have tunnel vision when I'm working. When I've got an idea, I'm excited about it." Every public dig and counterclaim cements the divide, yet both sides still share history, hits, and faces painted in silver. As tensions rise, Ace shifts from defending a legacy to building his own truth. A rock god's truth fights the echo of history. The symbol of the Spaceman hung silver and bright, but the story behind the mask got rewritten. Here, Ace Frehley attempts to reclaim the narrative. This is his version, unfiltered and unapologetic. In a March 2025 interview with Guitarist magazine, he says clearly, "They still say in interviews that they fired me, but I was never fired from Kiss. I hate when I hear that. And they say that both times I was fired, I quit both times in 1982 and 2002. He points out that many misconceptions were created by Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons. That claim sparks the biggest open loop of his story. Who controls the legacy when memories clash? Ace gives one clear example. After his first decision to leave, Paul Stanley showed up at his door and took him out to lunch, an attempt to change his mind. But Ace was already decided. That image challenges the older narrative of a forced exit. It gives the fan a choice: believe the band's version or believe Ace's. Why did this matter so much to him? Because he watched the myth grow around him, of a fired member, a casualty of excess and meltdown, when in truth he chose to walk away to stay alive creatively. By quitting, he kept his identity, his sound, his freedom. He had already proven his independence through his 1978 solo album. The myth beat down that fact. He refused to let the facts stay silent. He worried that rock fans would read the public story, assume he lacked loyalty, or that he was simply tossed aside. Instead, he wanted them to understand. I left on my terms. The difference cost him relationships, backstage trust, and maybe even dollars. But to him, it preserved dignity. Behind the stage lights and face paint, his final message was clear. Understand the truth behind my exit. Because legends are only as strong as the stories they believe about themselves. A high-voltage stage goes dark. A man known as the Spaceman steps into silence and leaves one last message. In one of his final interviews, Ace Frehley makes clear what he hoped his former bandmates would really hear. He tells Ultimate Guitar that he wants to be remembered as a straight shooter and a guy who stayed true to his craft and was respected by his peers. That line carries weight because he felt mischaracterized. Therefore, he uses his final words to set one more record, this time on his own terms. He stakes out 3 key truths: loyalty, creativity, and independence. He says he quit both times, 1982 and 2002, by choice. He says he never got the credit he deserves in shaping the band's sound and image. He says the fired myth hurts him more than the departure itself. In messages to Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons, his tone blends regret and resolve. He doesn't demand forgiveness, but he asks for understanding. The lunch at his doorstep in 1982 resurfaces, Paul trying to stop him, Ace already decided. The moment serves as an emblem of what he values: agency, creative control, self-respect. He also leaves a broader legacy message to the world: I'm more than the band I helped build. His 1978 solo album, which went platinum in just 2 weeks and sent New York Groove into the top 15, gives him the proof. He often explains that success freed him to quit, and that quitting freed him to become himself. A band moves forward without its icon. A legacy shifts in memory and meaning. After the exit, after the truth claims, the world watches Ace Frehley's story settle, and the reactions from Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley arrive quietly, yet loaded. When Frehley died on October 16, 2025 at 74, Simmons and Stanley released a joint statement calling him an essential and irreplaceable rock soldier during some of the most formative foundational chapters of the band. They express devastation across time, but behind those words lie years of scripted exits, public spins, and private pain. The phrase "rock soldier" tries to bind unity, yet it lands with the weight of unresolved tension. Fans and musicians echo his influence. Mike McCready, Pearl Jam, says his guitar playing changed his life. Maynard James Keenan, Tool, reflects on childhood nights with Spaceman dreams. That grounds his legacy beyond the band, and it complicates the narrative. If the man inspired millions, then the story of his departure matters to far more than band members. The timeline flips. In 2024, Kiss sold their catalog, brand, and likeness to Pop House for over $300 million. Frehley's version of his exit, voluntary, creative, contracts with that sale become paradoxical. He claimed license over his Spaceman persona and said he quit twice. That claim shifts in value when billions of dollars of rights move through the Kiss machine. The stakes rise not only in creative terms, but in legacy, ownership, and posterity. One guitar, one dream, and a Bronx kid rising above the noise. Before the pyrotechnics and the Spaceman makeup, Ace Frehley, born Paul Daniel Frehley on April 27, 1951 in the Bronx, builds his story far from the stadium lights. He grew up the youngest of 3 children. His father, Carl Daniel Frehley, works as an electrical engineer. His mother, Esther, plays piano. By age 13, his Christmas gift became his saving grace, the electric guitar. His school years spin between potential and peril. Expelled from 2 high schools, dropping out of a 3rd, gang ties and street fights. But music pulls him away from the edge. When he answers an ad placed by Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons in 1973, he brings more than riffs. He brings identity. The band auditions dozens, but his raw tone and self-taught swagger win him the role. He also draws the lightning bolt logo for the band and defines his Spaceman persona. Creativity already leads. The transition from street misfit to rock pioneer crafts his core mindset, control of his own story. When in later years he says he left Kiss by choice, that claim roots in the fact he rewrote his life long before. He turned an urban backdrop into bold stage fantasy, built a career that spans millions of records, thousands of shows. He carries early lessons. Struggle sharpens resolve. Independence becomes a badge. Identity becomes the fuel. He becomes not just the spaceman, but a man holding his own destiny. And now we circle back, what that foundation gave him when he walked away, and how it shaped his final message to Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons. Truth leaves echoes louder than guitars. Subscribe and stay close. The next story uncovers the hidden letters, the final phone calls, and the secrets even Kiss never dared to tell on record.